I once handled a case so horrifying it made my blood boil. The victim was a woman, and the autopsy results were absolutely horrific. From the myriad of wounds, it was clear she had suffered brutal torture while alive. Even after death, the perpetrator dismembered her, stuffed her into a jar, and disguised it as a pickled vegetable jar. However, the most terrifying aspect was the sheer human evil lurking behind it all. In our county's jurisdiction, there was a village located on the southern slope of a mountain, with a history spanning hundreds of years. Over time, the younger generation left, leaving only a few middle-aged and elderly households. Many houses, having been neglected for years, were on the verge of collapse from the ravages of rain and wind. The salted body was discovered after a heavy rain, inside a dilapidated mud brick house that had been abandoned for a long time. The pickling jar was waist-high. Its lid was a broken piece of tile, allowing rainwater to seep in, dissolving the coarse salt inside. The body, preserved by the salt, then floated to the surface. Upon receiving the report, due to the extremely brutal nature of the case, high-ranking officials took it very seriously and ordered Captain Su to personally lead a team to the scene. Forensic Dr. Zhang also accompanied them. The mountain road was treacherous. The one-way drive alone took 40 minutes. Upon arrival, we immediately sealed off the crime scene and began our investigation. The victim, retrieved from the pickling jar, was unrecognizable. The body was unclothed and dismembered. Limbs, torso, and head were all separated, and internal organs had been removed. A large amount of coarse salt had severely dehydrated the body, making it shriveled and rigid like cured meat. The heavy rain had caused the dry corpse to soak up water, leading to bloating, and the body's condition was extremely poor, as if she had been tormented in hell itself. Dr. Zhang stated that a preliminary examination was no longer useful. Only the sex could be determined. It had to be taken back for a rigorous autopsy to ascertain an approximate time of death, and even then, only an approximation. As for the victim's identity, it was basically impossible to determine from the body itself. Captain Su immediately assigned tasks. First, contact the local police station to inquire about the homeowner's information. In this case, the homeowner was definitely a major suspect and needed to be summoned immediately for questioning. Second, conduct a thorough search of the entire village, compiling a list of all missing women. Third, take a statement from the person who reported the crime, understanding the entire process of discovering the body. I was assigned the third task. The informant's name was Li Hao, surprisingly a non-local, 27 years old. I immediately understood why Captain Su emphasized this was also an important task. Because the body was hidden in a pickling jar, even with a broken lid, it wouldn't have been easy to discover. Furthermore, this village rarely saw young people. Why would a non-local like him suddenly appear here? After returning to the Criminal Investigation Unit, my colleague Zhao Jun and I interrogated Li Hao. My first question was, why were you in that village? Li Hao seemed a bit nervous, stammering as he explained that he was a photography enthusiast who came to this secluded village to capture nostalgic-style photos. The mountain scenery in this area was indeed beautiful, and tourists often came here for photography, so his reason was plausible. Why did you enter that brick house? Li Hao hastily explained, because one wall of that old house had already collapsed. I naturally thought it was abandoned, so I intended to go inside and take some pictures of the old way of life. After all, the interior layout of old houses is very classic, nostalgic, especially their decaying, ruined appearance when collapsing, which is very suitable for commemorative photos. Were you alone? Yes, traveling and taking photos alone. I'm currently staying at Hotel 20 in the county. If needed, I can stay here for a few more days. He then took out his phone to show us his travel tickets. He had indeed traveled through many places, visiting several counties in the last month, so there was no reason for him to deliberately come to this remote village. Our interrogation lasted over an hour, but the information obtained was very limited. Li Hao was very cooperative, with almost no suspicious points. Moreover, as the discoverer of the body, he was also very distraught, not like someone intentionally looking for a corpse. However, due to a lack of information at the time, we overlooked a crucial detail. After the interrogation, I asked Zhao Jun to follow up, checking Li Hao's personal information, profession, and social connections. If it was determined he had no connection to this case, then so be it. That evening, the most crucial part arrived. Captain Su had tracked down the homeowner, Zhou Yangdong, 48 years old, single. His household registration was still local, but he was working in another city. The delay until evening was because his specific address wasn't registered. We had to rely on the local police's connections to find him. Captain Su led the team out immediately that night for an interprovincial arrest. We finally apprehended Zhou Yangdong at a temporary housing unit on a construction site. After his arrest, he appeared extremely panicked and fearful. This reaction was very typical of a fugitive killer. Furthermore, Captain Su had also inquired in the village and learned that Zhou Yangdong had abruptly left for work elsewhere the previous year and had never returned, even cutting off contact with most villagers. Such a decisive departure, if nothing major had happened, made him highly suspicious. Captain Su interrogated him that very night. After just a few rounds of questioning, Zhou Yangdong broke down and confessed his crime. He had been on the run due to fear of retribution. 5 years prior, he had a conflict with a villager named Zhou Jianhua. Zhou Jianhua had 3 brothers, while Zhou Yangdong was alone, so they bullied him without restraint. Because of the conflict between the two sides, Zhou Jianhua and his brothers beat Zhou Yangdong. Zhou Yangdong sought help from the village administration, but they only mediated superficially without resolving the issue. Driven to desperation, anger boiling over, he chose an extreme path. He lay in wait on a path Zhou Jianhua usually took after drinking, then stabbed him with a small knife. After his revenge, he was overcome with fear, believing he had committed murder and would surely face the death penalty. So, he packed his bags and fled that very night. This escape lasted for 5 years. Of course, he didn't dare to check the news, so he didn't know that Zhou Jianhua had not actually died. He still feared that one day the police would come for him, and that day had finally arrived. Don't even mention Captain Su, even I felt a surge of irritation. Zhou Yangdong had confessed for an entire day, but he hadn't mentioned any clues related to this case. In his story of conflict with Zhou Jianhua, not a single woman appeared. So, who was that woman's body? Captain Su impatiently slammed the table, scattering the photos of the salted body, and sternly asked him, "Stop talking nonsense. Why is there a body like this in your house?" "Are you saying you know nothing?" Zhou Yangdong looked at the photos, his eyes wide as if they might pop out. He seemed even more bewildered than we were. Immediately after, he started crying out in anguish, claiming innocence. Captain Su and I exchanged glances. Could it be that he wasn't the killer? The next day, we continued our investigation in the village. After all, checking every household was time-consuming, especially since these dozens of households consisted of middle-aged and elderly residents, making communication difficult. Captain Su and I went straight to Zhou Jianhua's house. To be honest, his living conditions were ordinary. Although he had built a 2-story house, it was only a story and a half, and the brick walls were still rough. He looked considerably younger than Zhou Yangdong, only in his early 40s but still unmarried. Indeed, if you didn't leave this mountain village, getting married was quite challenging. When we brought up Zhou Yangdong's story, he was extremely indignant, even pulling up his shirt to reveal truly gruesome scars. Zhou Yangdong's claim of a single stab was actually inaccurate. Zhou Jianhua had been stabbed multiple times. He thought that because they were from the same village, Zhou Jianhua hadn't reported it to the police. I found it strange that someone with such serious injuries wouldn't report it. Nevertheless, we at least confirmed that Zhou Yangdong hadn't lied. After greeting Zhou Jianhua and leaving, our colleagues returned one by one to report their findings to Captain Su. And the result, of course, was no result. For many years, no one in the village had reported a missing person. No one knew the identity of the female body. Furthermore, the villagers were very tight-lipped, almost unwilling to say anything. Neither the middle-aged men, who were the pillars of their households, nor the elderly men were very cooperative. During his report, one colleague casually remarked to Captain Su, "Could it be someone from elsewhere who came here and died?" Captain Su simply nodded silently. I felt annoyed. The forensic report wasn't even out yet, the victim's identity hadn't been determined, so how could he jump to such a hasty conclusion? At the very least, solving a case shouldn't be so arbitrary. I took the opportunity to ask Captain Su what was going on. He glanced at me and asked back, "Do you know about the dirty secrets this village has been hiding?" I was even more confused and quickly asked, "Brother, I haven't been here long, how could I know?" Captain Su sighed deeply before saying, "This godforsaken place is even poorer. The men lack ambition, don't dare to leave, can't find wives, so there used to be a phenomenon of buying and selling wives here. This body is likely a victim of human trafficking." I listened in stunned silence. "It's already 2015. Is such a thing still happening?" Captain Su sighed again. "Not now, not in recent years. If it were, with my temper, I'd burn this village down. But we don't know how many years the victim was salted. It could be a very old body." I just felt a heavy pang in my heart. If this victim was indeed trafficked here, identifying her would be even more difficult. It's very possible no one will ever claim her. Even the perpetrator might not know who she was, because perhaps he didn't care who she was. He only needed her to be a woman, that was enough. Another day passed, but the case made no progress. To quickly push the case forward, we eagerly sought out Dr. Zhang to get clues from the autopsy. Examining a salted body is more difficult, but Dr. Zhang was still able to provide some preliminary results. And these results made me grit my teeth so hard my jaw ached. There were many injury marks on the body. Although it had been salted for so long, and the outer skin was shriveled, the scars that were once there were still recognizable. For example, on her wrists there were very clear and deep ligature marks, so deep they cut into the flesh. There were also many other wounds on her body, all scars from when she was alive. Her ankles also showed signs of shackles, possibly heavy iron shackles. From these marks, it could be deduced that for a long time before her death, she had been imprisoned and subjected to violent treatment. Additionally, the body's genital area showed abnormalities. Whether she had been sexually assaulted could no longer be determined. But during the examination, Dr. Zhang discovered that her genital area had likely been torn while she was still alive. That is, while dismembering her, the perpetrator also tortured and mutilated a woman's genitals. Based on these findings, it's not an exaggeration to say that this girl, while alive, didn't just suffer sexual assault, she lived in hell. Even we, who had witnessed countless cases, gritted our teeth in sheer agony upon hearing this. Dr. Zhang also stated that the body had been salted for about 2 to 3 years. This meant the body was created sometime between 2012 and 2013. So that was it. The sole suspect, Zhou Yangdong, could almost certainly be exonerated. After all, he had fled in 2010, 5 years ago, and hadn't returned to the village. The possibility of him intentionally killing someone and then transporting the body here to hide it was too small. Damn it! Captain Su slammed his fist on the table. The anger was real, but so was the feeling of helplessness. And the despair, that was real too. Because the case had hit a dead end, that was also the truth. Identifying the victim's information was crucial for solving the case. Dr. Zhang would continue the autopsy, attempting to extract DNA information from a body that had been salted for so long. But even if DNA could be extracted, it was not certain that the identity of the deceased could be determined. Because at that time, information in the DNA database consisted solely of SDR genotype data used for individual identification and kinship determination. Simply put, the DNA data sources at that time were all from criminals or individuals requiring special surveillance. And the purpose of the DNA database was also to suppress and prevent crime, helping to quickly find suspects from evidence at crime scenes and link cases together. We did not have a nationwide DNA database. We couldn't use DNA comparison to identify the victim. We could only continue our search in that village and enhance communication with the local police station to gather more information to see if any clues related to this case could be found. Captain Su believed it was imperative to investigate thoroughly whether this victim was a trafficked woman. If so, when was she sold here? Even I began to doubt his earlier statement that there had been no human trafficking in recent years. It might no longer be true. Clarifying this point could narrow the scope of the investigation, perhaps even directly leading to the perpetrator, the buyer themselves, being the killer. And if this was indeed still happening in recent years, why hadn't the police known? Captain Su was furious precisely because of this. He vented all his anger on the local police station. The police station in this village was established in 2013. Including the station chief, there were only 4 police officers. In other words, when the victim of the case was murdered, the police station might not have even been established yet, so they could provide us with very little information. It might also be because the station chief shared the surname Zhou. Regarding this case, the thing he said most often was, It's not that we didn't investigate, but that we truly had no leads. We all knew what that meant. Captain Sue was genuinely enraged. He threw his teacup to the ground, kicked over the simple table in the living room, then unleashed his fury on Chief Joe, swearing with words that cannot be recorded. Finally, Chief Joe, unable to withstand the pressure, revealed a name. Ma Xiaolan, a woman over 70 years old who had been sold into this mountain village over 40 years ago. Captain Sue asked the colleague who had visited Ma Xiaolan's house to search, inquiring about the old woman's situation. The colleague looked bewildered, seemed to ponder for a moment before remembering and saying, "Just a very ordinary old woman with white hair but still looks healthy. Her husband died early, and she lives with her youngest son, who's 37. Captain Sue frowned and asked again, "Her youngest son isn't married yet." "Not married." The old woman had 2 sons and 3 daughters. All 3 daughters married far away, and the eldest son works in another province, is married, and rarely comes back. It seems the family relationships aren't harmonious. Chief Joe giving us her name certainly had a reason. In mountain villages like this, human traffickers selling women also need accomplices. Would they really just drag a woman around the village for sale? Ma Xiaolan was probably that person. Her house looked decent, a 2-story house with a courtyard. When Captain Sue and I arrived, Ma Xiaolan was using a stick to feed chickens in a corner of the courtyard. The scene made her seem like just an ordinary old woman. Captain Sue walked up, presented his identification, deliberately creating an extremely serious atmosphere. Who would have thought the old woman didn't even pay attention, didn't even invite us inside, but told us to talk at the stone table and chairs in the courtyard. After sitting down, Captain Sue got straight to the point. "We found the salted body of a woman in Zhou Yangdong's old house, who bought her as a wife." Ma Xiaolan stared at Captain Sue for a long time, then sneered with a cold laugh, asking back, "What would an old woman like me know?" Captain Sue maintained his serious expression, intimidating her. "All the non-local wives sold here were done with your help. We have evidence." "Evidence, my foot." Ma Xiaolan contemptuously spat, "Go ahead and arrest me if you have evidence. What are you waiting for?" Captain Sue was taken aback. He hadn't expected to encounter such a stubborn subject. So he immediately changed tactics, beginning to appeal to her emotions. He sighed deeply and said, "The person is dead, nameless and without family. How pitiful. They are all women. Can't you put yourself in her shoes and think?" And Ma Xiaolan's next words were truly shocking. "They are all women. Why couldn't she be a docile wife?" I was so astonished that I couldn't help but blurt out, "No woman sold here is here willingly." Ma Xiaolan shrieked in a shrill voice, "Then she deserved to die, didn't she? This old woman was also sold here just like her. House number 20 wasn't it the same? Why don't you see them dying?" Captain Sue and I were simultaneously stunned into silence. The old woman was still screaming. Did someone really harm her? Who doesn't want heirs? People paid money to buy her. If she was sensible, who wouldn't let her live in peace? But if she kept causing trouble, what else could happen? So whose fault is it? It's that slut's fault. Is it our fault? Her voice was piercing. Her reasoning was complete. She could even logically justify herself. Captain Sue slammed the table and stood up, roaring, "Ma Xiaolan, what are you saying?" Ma Xiaolan also stood up, her voice no weaker than Captain Sue's. "That's how it is here. That's how it was in my time, and it's still how it is now. I even have to do this for my son. Can you control us, meddling in others' affairs?" I saw Captain Sue was so enraged that his veins pulsed, almost resorting to violence, and I quickly pulled him back. I was also angry, but I still managed to retain a bit of calm. At this moment, confronting her physically was useless. We would only invite more trouble. Moreover, with her age, she could easily fall and claim injury. Even if we detained her at the station, it might not be effective, because we truly had no evidence, and even if we did, it might not be useful. According to the law, individuals over 75 years old who intentionally commit crimes may receive reduced or waived penalties during sentencing. In normal circumstances, individuals over 75 years old would not be subjected to the death penalty during trial. We couldn't do anything to this demonic old woman. And she was still gloating. "I know everything, but I won't say anything. Let it infuriate you. Go ahead and kill this old woman if you're so brave. This village was peaceful until you people came and caused all this trouble. Keep stirring things up like a bunch of stray dogs. See if anyone here will defend you. No one in this whole village will defend you." Seeing Captain Sue losing control, I had to pull him away. Dragging him out of the courtyard, I could still hear the shrill screams of the demonic old woman. Captain Su was still reluctant, even shouting at me, "Are we just leaving like this? Are you just pulling me away like this?" I am someone who, when dealing with evil people, becomes cunning, even resorting to desperate measures. "We can't do anything to her, but she has children, doesn't she?" Captain Su immediately understood. "Good. Go investigate each of her children. Investigate thoroughly." This trip was not meaningless. At least we had confirmed one thing: the salted body was definitely a trafficked woman. We returned to the Criminal Investigation Unit, fuming with rage. By the time we arrived, it was already evening. The matter could not be delayed, because if we couldn't subdue Ma Ziyulan, this case might not be resolved. But I also felt a pang of sorrow. Wasn't Ma Ziyulan a woman herself? Hadn't she also been trafficked? Why did she show no empathy and instead became an abuser? It was truly terrifying. Just as we were working overtime, trying every possible way to deal with this demonic old woman, Dr. Zhang rushed in, holding a stack of reports, found Captain Su, and said that the DNA kinship test results were in, and the victim's identity could be confirmed. Captain Su and I simultaneously stood up, dumbfounded. In that moment, I truly felt disoriented, as if I had traveled to another world. Because we were still struggling to find the victim's identity, but Dr. Zhang had suddenly reported such information. "Kinship test, with whom was the victim identified and who provided the sample?" Dr. Zhang asked us. "Didn't you send the information of the suspected relative along with the hair follicle sample?" "We sent it." Captain Su was so agitated he spoke incoherently. "Tell us the victim's information first. The rest can wait." Dr. Zhang pulled out a folder and handed it to us. "Her name is Xie Miaomiao, born in 1987, went missing in 2009. She went missing at the age of 22, a final-year university student." The document even contained a photo of her, looking very innocent and lovely. According to her family, the last information she left before going missing was that she was going for an internship interview at an educational company. But that company didn't exist. It was clearly a scam under the guise of an interview, and the kinship test sample was her mother's hair follicle. But the problem was, who provided all of this? Dr. Zhang's explanation was always, "Your criminal investigation unit sent it." There were still a few colleagues working overtime in the unit. We asked each one. No one knew about this. We also planned to call other colleagues who weren't working overtime because this was truly too strange. However, strange things continued to happen. Immediately after I made a few calls, Captain Su suddenly slammed the table, roaring, "Zhou Yangdong has been released." By law, we could detain him for no more than 14 days for investigative assistance. Before being 100% certain he was not a suspect, we wouldn't release him easily. After all, the body was found in his house. Even if he wasn't the actual perpetrator, we still needed to consider why the perpetrator placed the body in his house and what connection the perpetrator had to him. So, when Captain Su found a release document from the detention center on his desk, he flew into a rage. He grabbed the phone and immediately called the detention center. I rushed to his side. "Captain Li, it's me. Captain Su needs to ask something. Zhou Yangdong has been released." I heard Captain Li's voice on the phone suddenly turn grim. The other party quietly asked back, "Didn't you sign the release order?" I knew something was wrong then, so I quickly signaled Captain Su. Captain Su immediately understood, hastily laughing and explaining, "Of course I signed it. I was just asking who brought the documents over. I have other important documents in my briefcase that I can't find now, so I probably need to ask the colleague who handled the documents." Although this explanation was clumsy, Captain Li was also understanding and didn't press the issue. "It was Zhao Jun, Captain Su. You can ask him yourself, ask him thoroughly, don't let anything else happen." "Okay, thank you." Captain Su hung up, frowning. "That kid Zhao Jun, where is he?" Zhao Jun was working overtime at the Criminal Investigation Unit, not yet home. When he heard Captain Su's angry voice, he immediately knew that the matter had been exposed. I intentionally opened a meeting room, pulled Captain Su in, and then called Zhao Jun in. Captain Su didn't mince words and roared at him, "Speak up, what exactly happened? Why did you release Zhou Yangdong? You're committing a serious violation of regulations." In fact, as soon as I heard Zhao Jun's name, I started to make connections. Zhao Jun wasn't the main person in charge of this case, he also had other tasks. He only coordinated with me to summon the witness who discovered the salted body, Li Hao. Only this point would give him a deep connection to the case. I quickly asked him, "Zhao Jun, were Dr. Zhang's documents also provided by you?" Zhao Jun silently nodded. "Those documents were given by Li Hao. He's not a tourist photographer. He came here specifically to find the body. It's very possible he's one of Xie Miaomiao's relatives. If so, the purpose of releasing Zhou Yangdong was for revenge. I suddenly stood up, yelling at Zhao Jun, "Where is Zhou Yangdong? Where is Li Hao?" Captain Su was also startled by my reaction. I was anxious because I guessed that releasing Zhou Yangdong wasn't to help him but to help Li Hao. It was to let Li Hao kill him with his own hands. Zhao Jun remained silent. I quickly continued to persuade. "Maybe you don't understand that Zhou Yangdong is not a major suspect. He's not the killer." This time Zhao Jun finally spoke, however. He was refuting me. "Who said I showed him photos of Xie Miaomiao and he was scared to death?" This point was indeed beyond my expectation, but that wasn't the most important thing at the time. The most important thing then was to prevent Li Hao from taking revenge on Zhou Yangdong. Even if he was the perpetrator, he should be handled by us. Otherwise, what was the meaning of our existence? Zhao Jun posed a question that struck at the heart of the matter. What if we can't find any evidence? Tell me. At this moment, Captain Su roared, "Even without evidence, I will deal with him. I promise you I will definitely deal with him. Don't drag others into this. Don't harm people." Zhao Jun sighed. In fact, he also knew he was harming someone, harming Li Hao. "I told Zhou Yangdong to stay at Hotel 20 and not wander off. Go there." Captain Su and I, along with 3 other colleagues, quickly rushed out. I drove, and Captain Su continuously called Zhou Yangdong and Li Hao. Unfortunately, both their phones were off. "Damn it, has something really happened?" I stepped on the gas. The county town wasn't small. In less than 10 minutes, we arrived at Hotel 20. Getting out of the car, Captain Su led 2 colleagues up to the hotel to search, while another colleague and I searched the late-night eateries downstairs. Phones off, they might be drinking. At this time, there weren't many people on the streets, and the late-night eateries were scattered, so we searched them one by one. 5 minutes later, Captain Su called, saying Zhou Yangdong wasn't in the hotel, and they would come down to search too. After hanging up, I suddenly noticed a suspicious figure across the street, in the shadow of a street lamp. He was wearing black, a mask, and a baseball cap on a night like this. His eyes were staring intently at an eatery opposite. I quickly turned my head to look. At an eatery across the street, a stout middle-aged man was sitting. Zhou Yangdong, with quite a few empty beer bottles on the table. He was indeed drinking so much his phone was off. Then the man in black, wearing a baseball cap, must be. In that instant, he lunged out. I also reflexively lunged after him and shouted, "Stop, Li Hao!" He heard me, but he ran even faster, at least faster than me. When he reached Zhou Yangdong, my colleague and I were still a few meters away. The dagger in his hand was raised, and at that moment, Zhou Yangdong looked up. He saw the knife and screamed in terror, falling back. "Ah, ah!" Li Hao had originally aimed for his neck, but because he fell back, the knife only struck his shoulder. Fresh blood splattered, and Zhou Yangdong tumbled from his chair. At that very moment, I lunged forward and firmly pinned Li Hao to the ground. Zhou Yangdong was utterly panicked. He clutched his shoulder, instinctively babbling, "Ah, help me, don't kill me." "It was Zhou Jianhua, it was him, it was him." Li Hao and I fell together. As I got up, I quickly pinned him down, roaring, "Damn it, don't move, don't move." He really wanted to kill Zhou Yangdong. Fortunately, the dagger in his hand fell to the ground when I tackled him. Even so, he was still struggling. I leaned close to his ear, speaking softly but firmly, "Don't move, trust me, don't ruin yourself." Perhaps it was then that he finally recognized my face. After that, he stopped struggling, but his eyes began to look blank and welled up with tears. Afterwards, our colleagues arrived and took Zhou Yangdong to the emergency room for wound dressing. Li Hao returned with us to the criminal investigation unit. Captain Su was very angry, believing this young man was going too far. "Why didn't you report all the information to the police from the beginning? Why did you have to act on your own? Have you watched too many TV dramas?" I told him to calm down and then asked Li Hao to confess the whole truth. It turned out he was Xie Miaomiao's relative. He was the murdered woman's boyfriend. University classmates, a couple, first love right as they were about to graduate and had promised to stay in that city together, working hard for their future. Xie Miaomiao went missing. She had been trafficked. From that moment, Li Hao had never stopped searching for her. As he spoke, he slowly began to cry. I promised her. I would protect her for life. I promised her. He traveled everywhere, to places where he might find her. From 2009 until now, he had searched for a total of 6 years. From graduation until now, he had never given up. On his social media accounts, all the content was related to his search for her. Zhao Jun had checked immediately. He hid it from us because he was deeply moved by everything Li Hao had done over the past 6 years. He proactively sought out Li Hao and understood the entire situation. Then he helped Li Hao contact Xie Miaomiao's mother, obtain the hair follicle sample via express delivery, and handed it to Dr. Zhang for identification. After confirming the victim was Xie Miaomiao, the hope that had sustained Li Hao through so many places for so many years collapsed. He asked Zhao Jun to release Zhou Yangdong because we had no evidence to prove he was the perpetrator. And Zhao Jun, in a moment of impulsiveness, complied. Of course, he had shown Zhou Yangdong photos of Xie Miaomiao, and his reaction was indeed abnormal. That's how tonight's scene of Li Hao attempting to kill Zhou Yangdong with his own hands unfolded. The more he spoke, the more agitated Li Hao became. He gritted his teeth and cried aloud. I can't imagine what she went through during those years she was trafficked. I can't sleep. The moment I close my eyes, I see her image. I can imagine her excruciating expressions of pain when she was tortured. I had no other choice, I just wanted to kill that person. I must kill him. She was so pitiful, imprisoned in a dark corner unseen by sunlight, beaten, humiliated, tortured until she was no longer human. Just thinking about it makes me ache with fright. She was so kind, she never harmed anyone. Why did this happen to her? Even after being murdered, she was salted like this. Do you know? She was the person I loved most in this life. She also had dreams. She wanted to pass the civil service exam to become a teacher, to shine. I often think, if she hadn't gone through these things, maybe she would have achieved her dream. Maybe she would be standing on a podium, teaching students. If not for this nightmare, maybe we would have settled down long ago. Maybe we would even have adorable children. We had planned everything then. Our future, our bright future, but in the end she could only die tragically in the dark. I cannot accept it. I truly cannot accept it. I beg you, please help me. You must help me. I truly cannot control myself. I really will go kill that person. Killing him 100 times, 10,000 times would not satisfy my anger. Faced with such a Li Hao, Captain Su was no longer angry. What could he say to comfort Li Hao? Captain Su didn't know either. We could only promise that we would definitely bring the perpetrator to justice. Li Hao would be temporarily detained. The case of intentional injury was not yet prosecuted. Zhao Jun, for violating regulations, would no longer participate in this case's investigation and would be dealt with separately later. Next was Zhou Yangdong. After his shoulder wound was bandaged, we interrogated him that very night. Because he had said a crucial sentence, I didn't kill her, it was Zhou Jianhua. No wonder Zhou Jianhua, despite being stabbed so many times, didn't report it to the police. It turned out he wasn't simply a victim. In the interrogation room, Captain Su and I took turns warning him that if he didn't tell the truth, Li Hao would continue to pursue him, and we wouldn't be able to intervene. Today's stabbing was just the beginning. We could stop him once, but not twice or 3 times. Li Hao was young and strong. He could escape, but death was certain. If he didn't want to die, he could only tell the truth. If he wasn't the killer, he certainly wouldn't face the death penalty. He just needed to say everything he knew, point out who the real killer was. Even if he ultimately went to prison, at least he wouldn't die, and Li Hao would transfer his anger to the real perpetrator. Already terrified by Li Hao's knife attack, Zhou Yangdong trembled as he confessed, and what he revealed was even more brutal than we could have imagined. In 2009, when Xie Miaomiao was sold into this village, the buyers were not just Zhou Yangdong and Zhou Jianhua. These 2 old bachelors couldn't find wives, and being poor, couldn't afford the price set by the traffickers. So, they conspired, each contributing half the money to buy Xie Miaomiao. Afterwards, Xie Miaomiao was locked in Zhou Jianhua's house, because his newly built house even had a basement. Xie Miaomiao was tied up in the basement, enduring all sorts of abuse from Zhou Jianhua, and Zhou Yangdong also occasionally came to satisfy his depraved desires. Their purpose wasn't to buy a wife or to have heirs, but simply to buy a woman to vent their anger. But the days of the 2 men possessing one woman couldn't last. They argued. Both wanted to claim Xie Miaomiao for themselves. No one would back down, leading to quarrels and even fights. This was the truth behind Zhou Yangdong stabbing Zhou Jianhua and fleeing. In other words, from then on, Xie Miaomiao lived under Zhou Jianhua's brutal control. Therefore, Zhou Yangdong didn't know when she was murdered. And why did Zhou Jianhua dismember and salt her body, then place it in Zhou Yangdong's old house? Zhou Yangdong provided even more clues. Finally, the case became clear. The next day, after confirming Zhou Yangdong was sober, we recorded his statement again. And next was the main culprit, Zhou Jianhua. We sent colleagues up the mountain, even bringing Dr. Zhang along. One was to summon Zhou Jianhua to the Criminal Investigation Unit for questioning, and two, for Dr. Zhang to inspect the basement to see if any traces could be found, although the chances were slim since many years had passed. Meanwhile, Captain Su and I stayed to review the entire case. My biggest worry was that we wouldn't have enough evidence. We only had a body that had been salted for many years. Although her identity could be determined, we couldn't prove this was connected to Zhou Jianhua. Zhou Yangdong's confession could only be indirect evidence. If Zhou Jianhua also confessed and his statement matched Zhou Yangdong's, it would be easier. This is called corroborating statements between witnesses, proving the truth of the case. Criminal law stipulates that it can be used for conviction and sentencing. But conversely, if we didn't handle it well, Zhou Jianhua might escape the law. Captain Su was very confident. No way, if he doesn't confess, I'll wring his neck myself. But my fear still came true. Zhou Jianhua was very calm. As soon as he entered the interrogation room, before we could even assert our authority, he declared flatly, "There's nothing to say about my business. If you have evidence, just charge me. If you don't, sooner or later you'll have to release me. You can beat me, but you can't force a confession, because I'm innocent." I never expected him to speak so eloquently. Just like that old demonic woman Ma Zialan, his reasoning was so powerful it was as if we had truly arrested the wrong person. Captain Su was furious, almost lunging forward to wring his neck. I calmed him down and actively contacted Dr. Zhang. Finally, she sent me a photo. In a crack in a corner of the wall, blood traces had been found. I showed the photo to Zhou Jianhua and questioned him. "Was Xie Miaomiao tied up in this corner then? We've found blood traces in the wall crack. Are you still going to deny it?" Zhou Jianhua panicked, almost leaping out of his chair. "Impossible, I cleaned it thoroughly." After saying that, he knew he had given himself away. Captain Su delivered a blow, pressing him back into his chair. After that, everything was much simpler. Zhou Jianhua's confession after admitting guilt indeed corroborated Zhou Yangdong's statement, proving both had committed crimes. Xie Miaomiao actually died in July 2013. The cause of death was too disobedient. For 3 or 4 years, she remained disobedient, so Zhou Jianhua beat the girl to death. Hearing it from his mouth, the cause of death was blamed on the victim, too disobedient. Don't mention Captain Su, my own fists clenched tight. When I asked why, after killing Xie Miaomiao, he also had to salt her body and place it in Zhou Yangdong's old house, Zhou Jianhua gave a reason that left us both amused and horrified. Because he still harbored resentment from being stabbed multiple times by Zhou Yangdong that year, he wanted to curse Zhou Yangdong. Salting a body was a malicious curse. It was precisely because of his absurd act that this murder case came to light. If Zhou Jianhua had simply found a hill somewhere to bury Xie Miaomiao, would anyone have ever known? The thought sent shivers down my spine. Leaving the room, we all breathed a temporary sigh of relief. Finally, Zhou Jianhua had confessed successfully. Blood traces from a wall after so many years? What the hell? All right, at least he's dead for sure now. Yes, Zhou Jianhua would certainly die. What about Zhou Yangdong? He would be convicted, but probably not face the death penalty. What about Ma Zialan? She was not involved in the murder. What about the villagers who kept silent? They were even less involved. However, were they truly innocent? I don't think so. Captain Su seemed to notice the simmering rage within me. He said, "Don't think too much, believe that we have the power." I nodded but said nothing. For a long time after that, I focused on handling the follow-up issues of this case, contacting Xie Miaomiao's family, investigating other details of the case from that year, and comforting Li Hao. He was only detained for a few days. After receiving verbal counseling, he was released. He also promised me he would try to start a new life. As for Captain Su, he did something very special. Because this case was truly too brutal, arguably enough to send shivers down one's spine, Captain Su seized the opportunity to request directives from higher-ups, hoping to thoroughly investigate the human trafficking incidents in that village and prosecute them to the fullest extent. Captain Su intentionally had Chief Zhou relay this news to the village. The village, already uneasy because of the salted body case, became even more agitated. Some villagers began to feel restless. This news was also relayed by Chief Zhou. A few days later, Ma Zialan hanged herself at home. In fact, Captain Su's directive was not approved by higher-ups. Seeing another death, they immediately frowned and demanded a halt. This didn't affect Captain Sue. It hasn't even started, what's there to halt? Initially, I didn't understand why an old woman over 70, who feared neither heaven nor earth like Mazialan, would commit suicide. Later, I understood. The person who killed her might not have been herself. It could have been the House X family or House 20 family. Mazialan was dead. Was everything over? No, that village still existed.